Okay, so chapter 13, we're covering tables. And tables, of course, you might think about your kitchen table, but there are tables that we create just like we create them like in Microsoft Word. You can create tables in web pages. And I am having a bit of difficulty with my Word document here. Here we go. Okay, so like in Microsoft Word, you can just do insert and then table. And now you have a table with rows and columns. And just like you can in Microsoft Word, merge a bunch of cells together, you can also do that on web pages as well. And so I just merged this first row, and then you can also on web pages merge different cells in a column. So there's a big merged cell there. So you can do that in Microsoft Word. And of course, you can also do that in Excel. Excel is made with a bunch of rows and columns. The numbers represent the rows, and then the letters represent the columns going up and down. Now, I know that I can tell that, it is difficult for some people to remember what rows and columns are. And so what I did is I did a search on columns. And if I do a search on columns, well, it didn't give me the columns on on a table on a web page or Microsoft Word. But see, these are different columns that you can have. Think about Rome. They had a bunch of columns there. But basically, notice how the columns are long. They go from up to down. They're long and skinny. So just like you would see let's say, in Excel, it's the long part. It goes from up to down. It's long and skinny. Now, what about rows? How can we remember what rows are? Well, if you think about theater rows, you go to a movie theater, you don't look at what the columns are. You don't look up and down. You look, well, are you on row 1, row 2, row 3? Those rows are running across, just like in the theater. This is row 1, this is row 2, this is row 3. So that's a good way to remember if you visualize, okay, well, the rows are like in a theater. The columns are like the columns in Rome or whatever. So yeah, and the reason why I'm paying attention to this is because your assignment, let me go ahead and go into the assignment. Your assignment that requires, your assignment requires 3 different tables, and each one of those tables has a specific number of rows and columns. So this very first one has 1 row and 4 columns. The second one has 2 rows and 5 columns, and the third one has 4 rows and 3 columns. So it's very important that you know the difference between rows and columns. If not, you might get them switched and then you're going to get points taken off. So you need to be sure that you know the difference between rows and columns. So I actually have an example here where there's rows and there's columns. And I have this example here so I can show the spanned row, which is the very first one here. And spanned means that it's merged, just like I did in Microsoft Word. And one thing to keep in mind too, like I said in this bullet here, is that the spanned row is still a row. And so it is counted. So this third table needs 4 rows and 3 columns. So here's row 1 with the title, row 2 with the subtitles, and then 3 and then 4. So those are 4 rows and then 3 columns going up and down. 1, 2, 3. So just be sure to know the difference between them, because I want to make sure that you get full credit and it's not because you have them switched. So anyway, going back to the chapter, so tables are basically a bunch of rows and columns, and they meet at a certain spot. So if I open up Microsoft Word again, excuse me, I have 4 rows here, 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And yes, this one is merged, but it is still a row. Just like this column here, it is merged, but it is still a column. So this is 1 column, 2 columns, 3, 4, and 5 columns. So again, please be sure to recognize those. Plus, also know that where a row and a column intersect, and actually that's visually helpful more with Excel, because when you look at Excel, each one of these blocks here represents a cell. It is an intersection between a column and a row. That is the cell. So be sure that you remember that term as well. Okay, excuse me. So one thing that that's very important that you remember, yes, we can create tables, and tables were a way for us to format things in web pages, because if you've noticed, we remember that we use breaks and we use paragraphs to separate information. But then the question comes out to, well, what if I wanted 3 different columns in my web page? Well, how are we going to make that look nice? Well, we used to use tables, and it worked, but now it's really not recommended because there's just so many issues with using the tables. You actually have to remember, going back to, why do we use CSS in the first place, cascading style sheets? Well, so we can format our web pages all at once. So instead of changing, let's say, the font on every single page on your website, which is 100 pages, you can just change the font in one place and it affects all of them. So when it comes to tables, you can't do that. I mean, there are ways of still doing it, but it's just more work to using tables. But in addition to that, you can't use that responsive design. And I remember when I told you about responsive design, I was trying to simulate it by, writing it out in Microsoft Word, but it would be so much easier if I would have just shown you on the web page. So if this is the Alamo College's webpage to log in, but if you just make it smaller, notice how it changes. It's responding to the size of the window. So this is what a web page would look like, on a regular computer. This one, and then, you're looking at tablet size, and now you're looking at maybe a cell phone size. So it responds to the size of the screen that you're working with. But when you create tables, you can't do that. You can't just drop down, this sign in button to the next row. But you can when you're using CSS. See how it just kind of drops down automatically. Okay. So yeah. Good example. Okay, so we don't really want to use tables just because there's so many issues with it, specifically responsive design. We want to make sure that our websites, change depending on whatever device a person is using. So here are the tags for tables, which is like, kind of just like, and actually let me go ahead and open up a Notepad. Okay, so here is Notepad++, and know how, okay, so we have the HTML tags, and then we have the head tags, and then we have the body. Now, of course, this is bad because I have it indented. There, that looks much better. Okay, so just like you have open and close HTML with tables, you have the open and close for the entire table as well. And of course, there's head and body that are similar. So when you create a table in HTML, you're going to do table, whatever's inside of it, and then close table. So now you have your open and close table. Now everything inside here will show up in the table. So there's the open and close tags. Then within tables, you'll be dealing with a TR, a TH, and a TD. Those tags represent, how your table is going to be represented. So, and TR and TH, TR represents the row, and TD represents the data, like table division. You're dividing it, and whatever TDs you have represents how many columns you have. So this one's pretty straightforward. Table row. This shows, okay, this is a row. This one, okay, it says table data or division. You have to remember that it's the column. But also know, in addition to having table, the TD, you can also have a TH. They basically do the same thing, but the only difference is that when you use the TH, whatever is inside of those cells will be bold or like a darker color. So this table here, they have THs, so it's going to be a bolder or darker text in there. And then here they're using TDs, so then it's not bold or it's not darker. And also know that they have a TH, so here's the number. Number 1 is inside the TH, and then TD for the division, so those are the other 2 columns, and they're not bold. Okay, so that's, so I'm going to cover the code in just a little bit, but I just want to focus on the fact that this represents rows, and TH and TD will represent the different columns. Okay, so this is a very basic table here. It is just one row. Notice how there's only one set of TR, TR, and TR. Then, so if you look at the example right here, there's only one row. Now notice that there's one set of THs and then another set of THs, and I can't highlight it. Yeah, it's making it difficult. Okay, so there's a second set of THs, open and then close, and then TH, open and close. So since there's 3 columns there. So let me go ahead and show you that in Notepad++. So number 1, we have your table tags. Number 2, you want to type out your row. So here's an open row, and then there's a closed row. And in this situation, I'm going to do exactly what the textbook has. I'm just going to have one table with one row and 3 columns. Okay, so inside of that row, and also pay attention to the indentations. Notice how table is, on the same line. Then we have your TRs that are indented, and then your THs. Now, notice how all these THs are basically on the same line. Of course, it's kind of mushed together, but they have them on the same line. And to tell you the truth, I never like doing that. I actually I've always preferred to have them on separate lines. So that's what I'm going to do. And I highly recommend that you do it because and of course, it's up to you how you do it. Well, it would be easier on me if you did it this way, so that way I can, of course I could see the way the book has it, but when you're working with other people or me, I'm grading this, you want to make sure that it's easy for somebody else to see, what you have on there. So let me go ahead and do the THs like they have. And actually, I'm just going to do the THs. And I like to copy and paste, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. 1 column, 2 columns, and 3 columns. So there we go. We have one table with 1 row, and then we have 3 columns within it. THs make it bold. So I'm going to go ahead and put 1, and then 2, and then 3. So let me go ahead and save this. Okay, so I saved it and I have no idea. Okay, I have it in the downloads in the 1311 folder. So I am going to go into my downloads and then go into 1311, and I'm actually editing the page that I already created called My Page. So if I double click that, and now we have a table with 1 row and 3 columns. Well, if you really think about it, is it really a table? How do we know it's a table? Well, well, and it's kind of a good thing, because if you're creating a web page, you don't really want people to know that, you're using a table for formatting or for whatever reason, or it really doesn't matter that, if they know that it is. But in our situation, we do want to know. And of course, remember, I showed you, if you right click and then you do view page source, it will actually show the source of that one page. So yeah, it's a table. Okay, but if you look at the web page, you notice that, you can't really tell. And yes, you can see your code when you're creating this page, but, is it really the amount of columns and rows that you want? Well, I highly recommend, and I put it on the assignment, that I highly recommend putting the border attribute. I highly recommend that, because it will show you the borders on your table, so that way you don't have to question whether it's good or not, because this is possibly your first time doing this. So putting the border there will help you determine if you did it right or not. So I went ahead and put the border, and then I saved, and now I'm going to refresh, and now you see the squares. So now you know that there's a border around it. Okay. And also notice, well, yeah, let me just cover what's in the book, and that's it, at least for now. Okay, so there's one table, 1 row, and then we're looking at the borders, and then we see that there's 3 columns. But remember too, and notice how it's bold. Remember that THs, it just makes it bold. If I were to change all of these to TDs, it would actually, it would be the same amount of columns. It would just not be bold anymore. Okay, so now they're TDs instead. Save and then refresh. And now they're not bold anymore. So just remember that TDs and THs represent the columns. And with me, I don't, if you look at the assignment, I don't actually specify whether it needs to be THs or TDs. I just want to make sure that you have, 4 columns or 5 columns or whatever I specify. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Okay. All right, so that was that table there. And again, notice how they just put it all in one line, but I actually separated them into separate lines. And I highly recommend that you do that, because it's easier for you and it's easier for me to troubleshoot. And also, if you wanted to just copy and paste, it would be easy to copy and paste as well. Okay. All right, so now we have a bigger table here. And again, the columns are mushed together. But again, that's fine, but not preferred for me. So let's see. So now we see that there's 1, 2, 3 rows and 1, 2, 3 columns. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, if you notice how there's row, row, and then all the columns within those rows. Now, one thing that is generally basically a trick. No, I don't want to show you that. I'm going to go ahead and do it this way. So TR. So now that we have one row, we need to add another row. So now I'm going to do another TR. And then close the TR. And now I'm going to do, now I can paste the TDs inside of them. So there's 1 column, 2 columns, and then 3 columns. So now this table has 1 row, 2 rows with 3 columns inside of them. So let's go ahead and save and then refresh. And now we have 2 rows and 3 columns. So let's say that we only wanted 2 columns. Well, you can just delete this one, and this one, the last one, save and then refresh. And now we only have 2 columns. So it's really just a matter of deleting the sets if you needed to. I'm going to go ahead and undo those. And let's go ahead and go back to the text. So that's pretty much it. Just a matter of adding your tables, adding how many rows, and then however many columns you want in those rows. Okay, so the last part here is, remember when I opened up Microsoft Word, I merged a bunch of cells together, like the top one, the top row, and then the second column. Okay, well, you can also merge them as well, and that's actually called spanning. And the code would be col span or row span. So col span will mean that it will fill 2 horizontal blocks. You're going to span across columns, and you can choose how many columns, just like in my Word document here. Well, I did the whole top, and then I did these 3 that were available. But you can just merge 2 of the cells. It doesn't need to be the entire block. So you could just do 2 of them as well. So just like they have a value of 2, you can span 2, you can span 3, 4, as many as you want, as long as that's the amount of columns that you have. And in addition, there's row span as well, and you can span as many rows as you want. And I really want you maybe to get used to saying it that way. You're spanning across rows, you're spanning across columns, because that is the way to remember which one to use. Okay, and so here is the error. Remember I told you there was an error in the text? Well, this is it right here on page 90. You see how it says col span equal, and then it has slashes. We actually want to use quotes instead. So col span or row span. I want you to also pay attention to the fact that they actually used both of them at once. On your assignment, you will only have to merge either a row or a column. Okay, just one of them, just because I didn't want to make it that challenging. Okay, so how do we span across something? Okay, so let's go ahead and look at my example here. We'll open up the page and the example. Okay, so here we have 3 columns on both, and then we have 2 rows. Now I'm actually going to span columns. And again, oh, let's actually save and refresh so that it makes sense. Okay. So yeah, let's go ahead and do col span, because we're going to span across columns. So how do we do col span? Okay, notice how inside of the TD you have col span. So just like we have like table border equals 1, we want col span equals 2. So let me go ahead and do, let's actually span across just 2 of the columns on top. So I'm actually going to do TD col span equals 2. There. And so you have the col span there. But one thing that you really have to remember is that when you're spanning, since it's going to take up 2 of them, we actually need to erase one of them, one of the TDs, because this TD is going to span across 2. So there's 1, 2, missing because that one represents 2, and then 3. And then we have the 3 on the bottom here. So let's go ahead and save and refresh and see what it looks like. And there it is. It's spanned across 2 columns. Remember that columns are up and down. Remember, Rome has lots of columns on their buildings. We spanned across 2 columns. Okay. So does that make sense? Okay. All right. So so I would say, thank you. That would be the most challenging part of this assignment. And one of the main reasons why I have 3 tables is because I want to start you off with just, a simple table. Just create a table, 1 row, 1 TR set, and we want 4 columns. Very good question. So you might think, well, when using col span, which columns will be merged? And that is a very good question. So I put, remember, okay, there was 3 TDs here, and I put the col span on the first one, and then I deleted the TD. Well, what happens if I put the col span here on the second one? I'll put col span equals, and then I'll put 2 again. And since this one is not going to be affected, I want to leave that one there. But this col span is 2, so it's going to take the second one and the third one. So I actually want to go ahead and delete that, because I just said that this column should span across 2. So we only have that first one, and then this one represents 2. This one has the first one, the second one, and the third one, because there is no col span. So if I go ahead and save and then refresh, oops, refreshing the wrong one. Refresh, see how it spanned across the last 2. So depending on where you put that col span, that's how the table is going to be changed. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, good. It's also good to know what happens if you forget, because it is possible that you might, okay, so I have this col span here. Is that all I need to do? You may forget to take off that last one. Very good thing to do. Well, now you're gonna kind of get a freaked out table here, because now notice how now you have generally 4 columns, but notice how this last one here just is not surrounded by a square, just like everything else. So that's how it would look if you forgot to take off this TD, or the last TD, the one that we needed to get rid of. So if I take that off and then save it and refresh it, now it looks good. Good, good. I am so sorry about that plane. Alrighty, good, good. So you can do the same thing when it comes to rows as well. So let's see, TD, it's still in the TD, but we want to span rows. So even though we're spanning a row, it's not going to be in the TR. It's always going to be in some sort of TD. So let's go ahead and try that. Okay, so let me go ahead and put it back to the original. And this time I want to span rows instead. And let's see how this is, they do it here. So there's TH. Yeah, okay, so it's really just 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns, 4, 5, and 6. So they have 6 columns here, even though there's 7, right? 5, 6, 7, yeah, 7, because they merge these columns here. So now we want to merge rows. So let's see how many rows are, well, let's see how many rows are on this top one here. Okay, okay, so, well, hello, there's 3 rows, 1, 2, and 3 rows. So we're still going to have the TRs the way they should be, but we're just going to span the row. So let's go ahead and try that. Okay, so let's say I will go ahead and do the one that the same as what they did. And it's basically the last 2. So TD row span equals, and I'm just going to put 2 just to make it simple. Row span equals 2. Now let's see what happens if I go ahead and leave all 3 of the TDs even though I spanned a row. Let me go ahead and save and then refresh. Okay, well, it didn't do anything. So what should we do so that it'll span rows? Well, we actually deleted a TD down here last time. It's not a column, but let's go ahead and delete the TD and see what happens. And that would be where the row span is. We save and then refresh. But again, notice how it deleted one of the columns down here, but it's not, it doesn't have the second square. So that's not right. I think keep that in mind. If you ever see like a blank area without a square, there's something wrong. And actually, let me go ahead and delete the content in there. So I'm going to save and then refresh. See how there's a square there, but there's nothing. So that's actually okay. That's okay with what the TDs are there, but it's not okay because of the row span thing. Okay, so what else could we do? What else could we do so that we span across rows? Because remember, we spanned across the columns earlier, but now we want to span across the rows. What would you think we should do? Well, there is a, okay, there is a, there's 3 TDs here and there's 3 TDs here, but notice how I have that row span in the middle there. Well, if it's the middle one, what happens if we just delete the second TD because it's a second TD here? Let's go ahead and save and then refresh. And now we have something completely bad. Let me go ahead and put a number back here. Okay, I'm going to save and then refresh. And notice how we still have that blank on top there. So that's a good question. So let's say we do the row span, and also it could be that that the table is just really small. Let's go ahead and put the row span on top and then delete the row span down here. So we're going to save and then refresh, and there we go. We have the one in the middle, and actually let me go ahead and change this to and TD to make it more obvious. There we go. So we spanned across two different rows. Remember, row 1, row 2. Okay, so keep in mind that you're not going to be touching any of these TRs. The TRs stay just the way they are. You're not going to delete the whole row, and you're not even going to put the span in these tags. The spans will always be in the TD. Okay, so does that make sense? Very good, very good. Okay, now let's say you wanted to add another column. So you could just do TD, and then close TD. So if you add a column here, you have to add it down here as well, or it'll look weird. Or let me just show you how it would look. So I added another column here, but not down here. So what will it look like? Save and then refresh. Okay, again, we have this empty area here that doesn't have a square, so that's bad. So let's go ahead and add another TD. Okay, and then save and then refresh. And now we have that square underneath it. So there, good. So yeah, and again, I'm not going to require that you do a col span and a row span. You will only have to do one. Okay, in the assignment, it says to merge the first row into one cell. And this, the assignment, you can put whatever content you want in the table. And again, I highly recommend that you put the border attribute so you can see what. Now, let me go ahead and delete that border to show you what it'll look like if it's not there. Now, notice again how, you know, we were doing all these changes here, and remember, you know, the empty spot was there because it showed me that I was missing that TD. And that was only because it had borders. What if I didn't have borders? Well, this is what you would see. Now, how do you know exactly if it's right without the borders? Let me go ahead and take off this TD. Remember, we could tell that it was wrong because it didn't have that inner outline. Well, what happens now when you save and refresh? Well, now you can't even tell that there's something wrong, but I will be able to tell. I will see that you don't have enough TDs in your page. So I highly recommend that you keep that border attribute in there. Save, refresh, and you can totally see what's in there. Okay, and yeah, that is pretty much it for the chapter there. Now, a couple of things. Now, at this point, the chapter is done. The assignment is, you have what you need to know to complete the assignment. You have table 1, table 2, table 3. Oh, and let me just kind of point out the headings. Remember, the heading will not be part of the TD. And you can, if you wanted to, do H1 inside of that TD. That's completely fine. You can put title H1, but it would have to be inside of a TD. Let me just go ahead and save and then refresh just to show you. You can put H1 in there. You can put H2 inside. You may have a table where you wanted it to be a certain size or a heading for some reason, but which is uncommon, but still you can. So you see that you can put the headings in there, but that's not exactly the way the assignment, or at least what I want for your assignment. Because remember that you're going to have 3 different tables. So right above the table tag, I would want you to put a heading. So it's going to be H1. This is the title for the first table. And then close heading 1. And then you have your open table. This H1 is not going to be inside the table. And I say that because sometimes I actually see it under the table tag here. And I think it even looks good. I mean, it looks like it's okay, but it's not okay. It should not be. There shouldn't be anything between the table and the TR. So if you refresh and then save, it looks fine, but it's not. It should not be inside. It should be above the table tags. Save and refresh. See, it looks exactly the same, but that was not the right location. So just be sure to put it outside of the table tags. So then you're going to have a heading 2, and then you have another table like that. So yeah, so that's just another issue that I run across. Okay, so let me just, that's pretty much all the issues that I remember. But also make sure that that last table needs to be looks just like this, but of course you can put whatever content you want. Remember that error. And also know that, if you scroll down, you see the rubric on how I grade everything. It has the specific points. This I have specifically, if you don't have the right number of rows or columns, I will take off half of the points. So just be sure. And this one, I didn't put it there, but yeah, if you have, 3 columns on this table or 10 columns, I will take off half points. It just doesn't say it there. But you do get 8 points if it does have 4 columns. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much it for that assignment, unless I think of anything else that you should know. So just remember the border, you need to have that in there. Now, one thing I do want to add, now this is not part of the assignment, but it will make your page look so much better, is that you can actually add attributes inside of, not the body. Well, yeah, you can add stuff in the body, but that's not what I wanted. This table, you can actually assign the width of the table. So you remember earlier, I didn't have a span, or I didn't have a lot of content in there. You could actually specify the width, and you can specify either a certain amount of, I guess, columns within this table, or you can do a certain percentage of the window. And I think that this would be better. If you do the table, the width is 80, save and refresh, it doesn't, oh, hello, 80%. Save and then refresh, and now you're using 80% of the window. So if I make the window larger, notice how it continues to be 80% of this window here. If you do a certain number, then it's only going to be the number and it's not going to adjust. So I would highly recommend 1%. But again, this is just in addition to what the chapter has. So you don't have to do that. But if you want it to look better or nice, then that's good too. And, and remember too, that any assignment, once you do the requirements, be sure that you save what you have so you can submit it. And then you're always free to change the page and, just kind of practice things that you know, or things that you might want to practice, because, and I'm happy to see, things that you've changed. Another thing that you might want to look at, well, actually, background. If you do background in the body, that would actually allow you to put a picture or an image in the background. But if you do BG color, and again, this is like the old way of doing stuff, you would do this with CSS, and we'll see that in the future. But you can do BG color and then specify a color. If I put red or blue, it would be really dark, so that would be bad. So I just put pink, or actually, well, yeah, let me leave pink. If I save and refresh, now we have a pink background. So there's so many different things that you can do, and you just make it fun and interesting. Okay, and you could also put yellow is not a bad color. Always remember that you want your pages to be, oof, that's very yellow. Oh yeah, and so let me show you another thing, is that remember, or maybe, no, I haven't even covered hex in this class. Hexadecimal. If you're familiar with hexadecimal, if you're taking intro to networking or any networking classes, you might run into hexadecimal numbers when it comes to IP addresses, the IP version 6. Well, hexadecimal, you can also use that to represent colors. Because remember, hex is really just a numbering system, like decimal is, 0 through 9, or binary, which is 0 through 1. Well, it's just a representative of ones and zeros. It's just a different way to represent it. So you can actually do, let me see. Yeah, here we go, hexadecimal color picker. And oh, here we go. W3 Schools is the website that we're going to be using in the future, and it's good for you to be familiar with it. And we totally trust this site. And when I did a search earlier, it was like, well, I don't recognize any of the sites, because I'm very careful about what I click on, because anybody can create a web page. You can create a web page, and you can do and display bad things. But anyway, so here is W3 Schools. I trust that button, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And you can actually, like, let's say any one of these colors here, if I just choose, let's say, a light blue here, or maybe this one here. Here's the selected color, and there's different ways of representing colors. There's the RGB, and we'll look at that later when we're doing Canvas. But this is actually the hexadecimal representation of that color. And also notice how it's kind of showing you different things on it. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, so here's the hex representation of the color. And remember, hex is just a bunch of ones and zeros, but it's just making it so that it's smaller. If I put, and notice how it has that pound sign there. If I put pound, well, actually, let me just put blue, just because I want to show you the reason why I'm choosing this. If I put blue, and then I save and then refresh, it's really bright, dark blue, which is not really a good color for a web page. So then you want to specify, and I think you could even put light blue, but then that still limits you to what colors you can use. So I would highly recommend going to this site to find a hex color that you like. So now I'm doing BG color equals pound, and then that hex number that they gave me. or hex code. It's not really number. And then I refresh, and so now it's a more subtle blue. So that's just another thing that you can do. Yeah, and specifically the width from this assignment would be helpful. And let me go ahead and change that because I didn't show you how it would look if you just changed it. You can do 50% of the window, save, and then refresh. And now we're only using 50% of the window. So even if I were to make the window even smaller, notice it's still just taking 50% of that window there. So that's just a little bit of additions to what you can do. But always remember that you want to do the requirements of the assignment first. You want to make sure that everything, and let me make that a little bit bigger. Everything that's required, you know that you've checked through the rubric and you have everything. Then you can start playing around with colors and all that other wonderful stuff. Except for this border, I highly recommend that you use that. Okay.